October 7th, 2023, for me, like September 11th, they held a celebration on October 8th.
Wait, what's this flag, sorry? It's the Hamas flag.
It was safer to send me to Israel in the Second Intifada than to keep me
Wow.
in high school. The Hamas charter very clearly says in it that they exist to murder Jews. It's not about Israelis, it's about Jews. They came back traumatized and they came back looking like skeletons.
May 30th in Montreal, May 31st, there was another attack. October 12th, 18th December, 20th December, August 8th, 27th August. What is Intifada, Zionist? Can you tell me what happened? Why is all of this going on? 2 years since the October 7th massacre. Over 3,000 terrorists invaded Israel and over 1,200 innocents were killed, slaughtered, raped, and taken hostage. That incident divided not just Middle East, but the world. The world right now is more divisive than it has ever been in 21st century. Middle East is more broken than it has ever been in the 21st century. Western countries are more divided than it has ever been. It's not just the Jews that are impacted by this. It's every single citizen and resident of majority of Western countries and any other country across the world. Because what we are seeing is hate, division, antisemitism, anger, and a lot of misinformation and a lot of bad actors taking advantage of this situation for their personal political agendas and ideologies. To talk about this today, I have a very, very special guest, Ariella Kimmel. Ariella, how are you doing today?
I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for taking your time out.
Thank you for wanting to do this one.
Absolutely. Ariella, guys, is one of the most fearless voice in Canada that we have, who's not scared to talk about what's exactly happening. And when you scroll through her Instagram or her LinkedIn, you would exactly know what I'm talking about. So Ariella,
don't check out my Twitter.
I'm gonna put the link to her Twitter. So I want to kind of get right into it. October 7th happens, 2023. Where were you? What was your reaction? Can you tell me a little bit about the time when you got to know about this?
Yeah. So I kind of liken October 7th, 2023 for me, like September 11th for a lot of people, although also me, where you can you'll always be able to tell where you were on that day. So October 7th, 2023 was Thanksgiving weekend that year. So I was actually in San Francisco visiting a friend. And we had all these like winery visits and like a really nice weekend planned. So Friday night, San Francisco, because it was 3 hours behind Canada, it was already morning in Israel. And so I started to see all these like weird tweets and coming in on social media talking about people saying that there's like terrorists on the street in the different kibbutzes and the different communities. And then all of a sudden there was a video of elderly people who had been gunned down, waiting at a bus stop to go on like on a trip to I think it was the Dead Sea. They were waiting for a bus, and he just started coming in, and all of a sudden you're just consuming everything. Hamas is posting it on Telegram. It's then getting pulled and put on Twitter and Instagram, and every social media platform is just playing this on loop. Even, I mean, they broadcasted murdering people live on Facebook. So it was just all this content constantly like coming in. I honestly don't think I slept. Like I can't remember sleeping that whole weekend because like I was just so consumed by what was happening and what's going on and what's like, and needing to know what like everything and not wanting to miss a second.
When that happened, did you ever imagine that 2 years later we would be sitting here talking about this in a way that we're going to talk about right now, antisemitism against Jews, synagogues being attacked. Did you ever imagine you would see this face?
I'm not naive enough to not think that anti-Semitism was going to rise after this. We've seen it as a trend. Hamas starts a war with Israel, you get tensions, they rise, and then they go down. Did I ever imagine to this extent, for this long, with this little action from politicians and police? No. Like that's the part to me that's very hard to comprehend. You know, you're watching, if you go back to October 7th, 2023, you're watching a video of literally like terrorist paragliders flying into a music festival. And like your brain doesn't at that point really think like what's coming next. It's how is this even happening? Like how could this happen? And that's still, I think, a question so many of us have is like, how could this have even happened?
Yeah. And I'm sure that, I followed you and you've either personally you've spoken to some of the victims or victims' families, and one of the thing that challenges me a lot, realize that all of this is somehow hidden. All of this is somehow not visible, right? So I really want to put this website out, guys. I'm not going to be able to mention that on the video, but it's called as Hamas massacre.com. If one would go to that website, all the videos that you were talking about, it's all posted, and you cannot sleep. I could not certainly sleep after watching those. But can you talk to me a little bit about some of the victims that you may have spoken to, and some of the stories? Like, take your time and
I mean,
educate us.
Yeah, so I've actually worked with the last 2 years so many. So I'd say at the beginning right after October 7th, probably like 4 days later, I got a message from a friend of mine in Israel, and he said one of the mothers of one of the hostages wants to do television, and in Canada, she wants to get her voice out there. Can you help? And so a friend and I helped get her on TV, and she was the mother of Romy Gonen. And then the world comes at you fast. All of a sudden, I meet eventually Maureen Leshem Gonen, who is the cousin of Romy, who has been a tireless advocate for her in Canada. So Romy was at the Nova Festival, and she was, I believe 23 when she was kidnapped. So she's one of the 250 who were kidnapped. And she was held in the tunnels of Gaza for almost, I think, 15 months. She was part of the release, the women released in February of 2024. And I remember we did a news conference with Maureen that day. And I remember sitting and watching her be able to talk about Romy coming home and what that felt like. And there's, I in the last 2 years have worked very closely with the Hostage Family Forum. When they, from the first trip when they came to Canada at the end of October 2023, a group of them, I helped them set up media interviews. And it's been that way ever since, that when they come, I help with a group of people. We help with meetings with politicians, we help with media, we help with whatever they need so that they can have their voices out there. And so there's a lot of personal connections that I have to these hostages without ever knowing them, because their families have so greatly impacted me. And then on the other side, I'm working very closely with the Canadians there's 8 Canadians who were killed. Most of their families are kind of in a coalition together. They're, working on lawsuits together. But, even today I put out a statement from them for October 7th. None of their families survived. Were 8 murdered Canadians. The only one there was Vivian Silver, who was thought to be alive for a number of weeks, and then her body was found so badly burnt that she was hard to identify her. And then my friend Iris's parents were out for a walk in the morning of October 7th, and they were taken hostage and they were murdered.
While they were on a walk? They were not in the music festival?
No, they were on a walk, and they went for a walk every morning. And all of a sudden, they start getting the red alerts because the rockets are coming in. So they went to kind of hide out and take shelter in a field, and were eventually killed. But their bodies were held hostage, and Israel actually and the FBI, I believe, were working with them, recovered the bodies of Judy and Gadi, who were Iris's parents, who were murdered. And so, one of the things that Iris really inspires me, she's just she's fearless. She's fearless, and she's just watching what's happening here as she grew up with the values of Canada really taught to her. Her mom was a proud Canadian, and she's watched what's happened here, and she will, be very blunt about how, the very little that was done for her, versus her dad was American. So if you compared the two governments and the support she got and the help that she got, it was like a world of difference.
I kind of saw your voice shrink a little when you were telling this, because it's very clear that all of us are like very emotional when we speak about it, and it's hard, especially for you because you've heard stories. Can you maybe tell me the state in which hostages were luckily when they were released? I know many never made it or would not make it, but can you maybe give me one example of what state they were in?
Yeah. I will also say like my voice definitely, it's like it does change because it is so personal and I'm so connected to them. And I feel like, when I watch them come home in any of the hostage deals, it feels like someone from my family is coming home and you're so connected to them. And I will like, the videos that are now out on that website, I saw those early on. There was this 40-minute video that they showed to journalists, only like journalists and politicians. And so I helped arrange showings for journalists, and I'll never get those images out of my head. And one of the journalists and I for a long time would kind of talk to each other. There'd be, a massive protest on the streets here in Canada. And I'd be like, why is this so triggering? And he's like, because it's the same screams, the same chants, it's the same message.
That was being said
That
there.
was being said. Sorry, what was your question?
No, it's okay. It's okay. So, what state were some of the hostages when they came back?
I mean, it varied because they were obviously like in late November. I think it was late November 2023. There were a number of hostages that came back. So they had been held for about a month and a bit. And so obviously they came back traumatized and many were injured. But they, luckily came home. As time went on and you saw them come back, you saw them like they came back looking like skeletons.
Right.
Literally, they looked like, some of them looked like Holocaust survivors. They were just so skinny and so skin and bones that there's nothing left to them. And, you think about it, that was when they were the last kind of batch that you saw coming back was in February of 2024. There's still people there, right?
Since February 2024, there has not been another release.
No. So there's still people there. So still 48 people there. Not all of them are alive. But they, we know they're being tortured and they're being starved and they're being beaten. I mean, Hamas will release hostage videos. They released one of Abiatar, who literally looked like skin and bones. Like and they were forcing him to dig what, they tried to portray as his own grave. And he was basically non-existent. So you're just, the mind starts to think like there's not much time. There's just, at this point, the States says there's about 20 of them still alive. Those 20 need to come home. Those are, sons and fathers and brothers and parents. Like there are little kids whose dads are still being held.
How many Canadians were taken hostage? How many died? How many came back?
So 8 Canadians were murdered on October 7th. None of the hostages were so Judy Weinstein would have counted because she was Canadian and her body was held hostage, which in itself is just is such a vicious thing to do. But none of the other hostages were like Canadian by birth. There was definitely a lot of connections. People who had family here in Canada. So, one of the families had a brother, an uncle brother who were here. It was a mother and her 2 kids who were taken hostage. And those 2 kids had spent the summer, the older one had spent the summer at like one of the Jewish sleepaway camps near here in Eastern Canada on like the summer before. So she was very much part of the community that they have.
Okay. So now I want to kind of divert to something that I would want to call as the educational section of this, because I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm of an Indian origin. October 7th, when it happened, it was obviously terrible for anyone to watch. But majority of non-Jewish background or non-Palestinian supporting background, like if you see, we are all not really aware of exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly why is it happening, whatever is happening. Sometimes people come to me and ask, wait a minute, why do you guys fight like India and Pakistan? Why do you guys fight? Like, what's the issue? And like, it's very common that many people come and ask, they're not at all having any knowledge of what's going on. One thing that I believe or realize that there is always three sides to a story. There is the side from the Israeli side, Palestinian side, and then there is the truth, right? I want everyone who is going to watch this particular section of the podcast to at least know from your end, to the best of your ability, the truth side, if possible. What is the reason for all of this happening? Like, you can go back to as back as you want to go in history, because I know that it can kind of get debatable, but I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what happened? Why is all of this going on?
So I can give you. So I hate to say it because I don't want. It's not context for October 7th, right? Because there are people who say, well, October 7th was just, part of a 70s, like the oppression, and it didn't start on October 7th. It did start on October 7th. What happened on October 7th is unique and
terrible.
But like the very short version was following the Holocaust, Jews were already living in Israel. There had always been Jews in that land. We are the indigenous people to that land. It's biblically connected to us.
Right.
And Jews have lived there, but throughout history they have been exiled by the Babylonians, by the Romans, and gone to live other places. Spain, then we had the Spanish Inquisition, then people ended up in Eastern Europe, then we had pogroms and the Holocaust. And so as history is unfolding, there was groups of young people, especially, who went to Israel and were starting to live off the land and wanting to build a state. And the vision was a state for Jewish people to be safe in a homeland. And that's what Zionism is, right? And the bare bones, smallest, the definition, without saying I'm a national Zionist, I'm this Zionist. A Zionist is someone who simply believes that Israel has the right to exist as a state for the Jewish people, and that the Jewish people have a connection to that homeland. It's very simple. So in 1947, you're now testing my high school education here. In 1947, there was a partition plan the UN presented to the Palestinians and the Israelis. And so this kind of came because the British had Palestine as it was under British rule, and then they decided to leave. And so the UN tried to kind of partition the country. Israel accepted it, and the Arab world did not. And that led to the First War, the War of Independence in 1948, which led to the founding of the State of Israel as we know it today. Successive numbers of wars have changed the borders of the country, expanded them in the north. At one point, the Sinai Desert, Gaza, West Bank, those have all come in through, those have all been through wars that have gone on, most of which were started by the Arab world. Where we are today, the truth, I don't always know if it's really about the land or if it's really about the religion. And more so now than I ever did, because the land is obviously something special. It's something important, and it's something that speaks so deeply to the Jewish world. And I don't deny Palestinians have a connection to that land as well. I'm never going to say they didn't, right? They also lived there. But the inability to live peacefully side by side, and the years and decades of wars, I don't believe is just the land. It is a visceral hatred for the Jewish people, right?
Why do you think that is?
Because it's not about, the Hamas charter very clearly says in it that they exist to murder Jews. It's not about Israelis, it's about Jews. And you see that because they target us around the world also, right? If the shooting that happened in Manchester last week, it's said to have been connected to Hamas. The bombing of the Argentinian Jewish Community Center, in the 80s, was done by Hezbollah. right? So they've like these organizations have been existing to murder us. And it doesn't matter where it is; it's that they want to target us. And what's happening here on the streets is they're not talking about peace with Israel. They're not talking about ceasefires. They are calling from the river to the sea. They're saying from sea to sea, Israel should
That is
not
from
exist.
Jordan River
To the Mediterranean.
to the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah.
So they want, that means it's
The whole
all of the
country.
entire land.
Yeah. Will be free, and that's the entire country, you know. And so free Palestine is not a movement about creating two states that live peacefully side by side. If it was in the last 24 hours, you know, the protest would be calling for Hamas to sign the ceasefire deal, right? That's not what this is. They've never once called for the hostages to be released. It is driven by hatred of Jews, and it's so becoming, you know, I never was naive to anti-Semitism. I very much lived it in my life, but to see now where we are, I lived in Israel during the second Intifada. Terrorists were not going into bars and restaurants and nightclubs and shopping malls and wherever they could, and buses, and setting off suicide bombing because they wanted land. They wanted to kill us. And that was, was it.
There are some words that a lot of people do not understand. One of them was Zionist for me. Thank you for letting me know. What is Intifada?
The Intifada, so you also will hear that being chanted on the street, Intifada revolution.
Right.
The very clever people who are chanting it, when someone like me says it means like you want to kill Jews, will say no. In Arabic it means like shakeout. In Arabic, it actually means like the Intifadas were the first and second Intifadas were like very heavily systemically planned terrorist attacks against Israelis for a number of years. So the first one, it was in the 90s, was really focused on it was a lot of like more like rock throwing and Molotov cocktails and really more like rudimentary. In the 2000s, in the early 2000s, it was suicide bombings and primarily suicide bombings in restaurants and bars, on buses, in hotels, you would go somewhere and you didn't know.
So it has been happening for a very long time.
So that happened in the early 2000s. The second Intifada, I guess we'd say, came to an end about 2004 or 5. And part of that is because Israel built a bigger wall. They built a wall and a fence. Most of it's a fence, but they built larger security infrastructure because like that's what you do as a country. You protect your people from being blown up for going to dance at a music, at a concert or at a nightclub. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were in Israel, for some period of time growing up, and it's not the first time that you've seen anti-Semitism. Now, this is also educational to a lot of people because a lot of people think that Jewish people are hated upon after October 7th. Now, can you talk to me a little bit about your experiences that you've had as a Jew, prior to any of these happening?
Yeah. I'll talk about high school because it was obviously just like last year. So I'm from Ottawa originally, and I went to a high school called Woodruff High School. I started there in grade 10 and very quickly learned that you are not liked if you're Jewish. So I went to school, I was wearing my Star of David, and this girl came up to me in class, and she said, in homeroom, and she said, I would tuck that away. And I looked at her and I said, why? And she's like...
Sorry, how old were you?
I would have been grade 10, so what was I, like
16?
14, 15?
14,
yeah. And I asked her why. And she said, you don't, like I would put it away. And then I asked her name, and she told me Kaya. And I was like, oh, that's pretty. How do you spell it? And it was Chaya. And I said, oh, so Chaya. And she's like, no, Kaya. And because Chaya is a Hebrew name, and she didn't want to identify herself in that way. And it just progressed from there. I had Death of the Jews written on my desk regularly. Hitler should have killed you all.
This was in school?
Yeah, this was in high school. The kind of like the running joke I have is, so in the second half of grade 11, I went and did a semester of high school in Israel. And this was in the middle of the second Intifada. This was like the worst year of the second Intifada. And I always joke that my parents decided it was safer to send me to Israel in the second Intifada than to keep me in high school. There was a lot of aggression towards me. Like I said, like regularly, Hitler should have killed you all, death to the Jews, comments like, all the rich Jews. Like if you are like this, if you remember where you were on September 11th, it's my first week of public school. And when it happened, and I was sitting in class and all of a sudden everyone behind me is saying, well, we obviously know the Jews did it. And I was sitting there like, do we know? Do we know that? And I remember going home for lunch that day, and my dad, who never would have come home during lunchtime, came in like running into the house, and I didn't go back to school for the afternoon because it was like unsure if it was just wasn't a safe environment there ever.
So, experiencing what you've experienced and knowing all of this happened, October 7th happens and you see 1,200 people massacred, like probably the worst thing that you've ever, visually seen on television or on your screen. What did you think would be the reaction of Israel? Like, what would you have expected them to do? We'll talk about their reaction as we go, but what would you have wanted to see?
There was no choice but war. Right? Okay. Like when you saw what happened on October 7th, it was a declaration of war by Hamas, and they were holding hostages, right?
Right, of course.
So there was no way that there wasn't going to be a war. It just, you saw it happening and you knew what was coming. What would usually happen for a number of years was Hamas would shoot rockets at Israel. They would shoot one too many. Israel would get upset. There'd be like, a little, like there'd be an air war, maybe very rarely a ground war. And then things went back to normal. There was no going back to normal on October 7th. Communities were destroyed. Families were massacred. There was no question that this was a declaration of war.
So for a lot of ideal minds, this makes sense. But when did you start seeing the anti-Semitic rallies?
Oh, right away.
You started seeing it right away on October 8th, probably.
The Palestinian youth movement, which leads a lot of these protests, and frankly, media like to quote and pretend that they're not raging anti-Semites. They held a protest on a celebration. It wasn't a protest. They held a celebration on October 8th. They had
celebration on October 8th. Yeah. Where was it?
In Mississauga.
Mississauga had a celebration on October 8th.
Yeah. Come and, and celebrate the resistance, right?
Sorry, I really don't mean to cut you. When did Israel start responding back? Was it
20 days later?
Israel responded October 27th.
Yep.
The first response.
Yeah.
Celebration happened in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. October 8th.
Yep. And not just here, like across the country, there was celebrations. It was very obvious. And they couch it in language of, we support the resistance. The resistance is Hamas. You support terrorism. You are very blatantly celebrating what happened. I remember one protest poster literally used the imagery of like the hang glider that were flying in, right? Like they literally were celebrating this. From the day one, and they were using it and they were couching it in language of resistance is justified, and also protests against Israel. But when they were starting to have these protests, Israel hadn't even recovered all the bodies. Israel hadn't even come to the point where they realized they knew all terrorists had been either like arrested, killed, or had gone back into Gaza. So they were still cleaning up while they were protesting on the street here, pretending that Israel had already started a war.
This is scary to hear, because if this is the society that I'm living in, then it's very hard to find hope. And similar examples happen across different parts of the world as well. A place called as Pahalgam in India, a terrorist attack happened. And India's response was seen as nationalist, and they were basically not supposed to respond. And me coming from Indian background, like that did bother me as well. So these protests started happening. certain events took place. Like, I do have them on the screen. If you can go to the events that happened, all the anti-Semitism. Yeah. So I tried to pull up list of, some of the major anti-Semitic incidents that has happened in Canada. I'm not talking about North America, Europe. I'm just talking Canada. And I got like 3 pages worth of incidents, 3 pages. Some of the things that May 30th, there was gunfire in Montreal. May 31st, there was another attack. October 12th, 18th December, 20th December, August 8th, 27th August. A lot has happened.
Yeah.
I really want you to educate us because I don't see CBC really covering it all.
No.
I don't see Global News covering it all.
No.
I do not see, the only thing that we Canadians see is protest that happens in huge numbers with covered face, and people are scared to talk about it. I've lost friends simply because I asked them what's happening.
Yeah.
I simply asked what's happening, and they would be like, you have no idea what's happening? You don't even deserve to be my friend. I'm like, dude, I'm asking you the question so you can answer me.
Because they can't answer you. Like, most people who are at these protests can't answer you. I kind of always joke. I joked to my friend the other day because I was at the dog park and this white guy shows up in a keffiyeh, and I could just
White guy in a keffiyeh. I'm interested to know about that as well. Yeah, please continue.
And so it takes so much for me when I see people like white people wearing them to not go up and be like, just point to me Israel on the map. Tell me where on the map it is, and then we can start from there. Mm-hmm. But most people don't know. They're literally consuming propaganda that's coming straight from Hamas. So I watch like Telegram channels of Hamas, and I can see what they're writing. There's no aid, the starvation, the etc. And then I can see it be printed in the media. Right? They're stating what Hamas is telling you as fact. It's propaganda. It is pure propaganda. This is akin to the 1970s with Russia when they were, they're hammering this propaganda in. They're doing it through our universities. Terry Newman from the National Post had a great piece about this, where how they have been infiltrating campuses and campus groups and really and making it like fertile ground for this kind of thing to happen. But most people can't tell you. They don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Forget the personal connection. You don't have to have a personal connection to, talk about the conflict, but you have to have knowledge, and people don't.
Yeah. So, when you're looking at all of these protests happening and you're personally, looking at anti-Semitism, can you point at I know that synagogues are being shot at. You cannot even go to your place of worship. You mentioned about you were a kid and, what was written on your desk is Hitler should have finished his job or something on those lines. Yeah. What are kids right now going through?
Yeah. So, what the list doesn't have is what's happening so frequently at the TDSB in the last 2 years, or the YRDSB, or the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, where Jewish students are being harassed on a regular basis. Teachers are not always innocent in this. They are often part of it. And they have made it so that these kids feel lesser than and feel targeted. Part of why I would assume that a number of school boards were taken over by the government of Ontario was because these have become cesspools of anti-Semitism, literally cesspools. And to the point that TDSB didn't even want to pass, there are people on the TDSB board who voted against passing a plan to combat anti-Semitism. Like, that's where we're at. And so, the daily things that are happening are not being captured because there's so much and there's too much. And then what's really not being captured is the vile hatred that is fueled in these protests, right? One of the posters for one of the rallies in Toronto tomorrow, it literally has the inverted red triangle. And the inverted red triangle is what Hamas uses in their videos, like when they post their propaganda videos of the war and fighting with Israeli soldiers. They put a red target over their next target. Like it means a target. Like it means to kill somebody. They've come to Jewish events and stood there and made inverted triangles at us, right? We know what they're saying to us, but nobody in mainstream media is willing to talk about it. And then it says wear your red keffiyeh. Well, the red keffiyeh is affiliated with the PFLP, one of the terrorist movements, and the more radical left Marxist terrorist movements. And so they're basically telling you to show up in support of terrorism. And that's just tomorrow they're going to be protesting 2 years of genocide. I'm not even going to touch the fact that this isn't a genocide. It hasn't been 2 years of anything. 2 years ago, Hamas terrorists were massacring Jews. There was not an Israeli on the ground in Gaza. Nothing was happening in Gaza. So they are purposely co-opting this language, and then it's being repeated in the mainstream media. The Canadian press piece today that went out literally said 2 years from the war in Gaza. No, it's not. It's 2 years from October 7th. It is not 2 years from the war in Gaza.
I really want to tell this to my viewers. I am trying to learn. I am a neutral person. If you're watching this and you feel like, I'm getting wrong information, I invite you to come here, talk to me, and give me what you think is the right information, or put it on the comment section. But one thing I definitely want to tell is, if tomorrow on October 7th, there is going to be protest, if we are going to see multiple protests on October 7th, then there is no justification against telling that is celebration of terrorist attack on October 7th.
They're not even hiding it this year. Like, last year they couched it in language of marking the genocide 2 years. This year, McGill and Concordia and U of T are having walkouts, and their posters are literally saying like, celebrate our martyrs, celebrate
October 7th.
Yeah. They're blatantly celebrating it on our university campuses and across cities, right? I guarantee you Ottawa will have a protest. Downtown Toronto will have a protest. And they're not protesting. If anyone here if any of your viewers disagree with what I'm saying, I'm very happy to sit down and talk to them, because, I'd like them to tell me, like, what does the red inverted triangle mean then?
Right.
What does it mean when you say Intifada revolution?
Yeah.
What does it mean when you chant from the river to the sea? Tell me what those things mean to you, because I know what they mean to me, and I know what they are meant to say.
Yeah. So, how do you think we got here? Because majority of people do not really know the history of Middle East, what is happening. And at least visually, when I look at the protest happening, it is majorly white Caucasians that I see. That's like a big group. Another group is obviously an immigrant group.
Yeah.
So how did they get whatever information they have about whatever they have in their head is the history? How do you think it got to a point where they've learned all of these things, where they actually believe, Jews should be responsible for anything that happens in the world, and they should be murdered or ill-treated?
There's two things I'll say. So the first is that, the Palestinians were, and I would say Hamas and terrorist organizations with support from Qatar and Iran, were able to turn the Palestinian cause into a progressive cause, right? Never mind that these are not progressive societies in any way, shape,
Absolutely,
or form,
yeah.
but they've turned it into a progressive cause, which has made, the, do-gooder, I'm going to save the world, white lefty kid who's overprivileged and not educated feel like I'm going to save the Palestinians. So that's one. The other is that anti-Semitism is the longest and most pernicious form of hate in history, and it's partially because it will change with its times, right? So during the plague was caused by the Jews. Let's kill the Jews. During medieval times, the Jews used Christian children blood to bake matzah, which is like the bread, the crackers that we have on Passover. And you see it consistently just morph into what will work at the time and what is with the times, right? the Holocaust didn't happen with the start of the gas chambers. The Holocaust started with the dehumanization of Jews and painting them as the enemy, right? The Jews are the socialists, the Jews are the communists, the Jews are the ones who are, and that's, they control the media, they control the world, they control, ask Marjorie, Green, we control the weather, right? Like we have this control. And so what's happened in the last 2 years is so all of these things are, we call them blood libel, right? So it's lies about how Jews, are, again, like the Christian baby one is like a predominant one. And now you'll hear, Jews are harvesting the organs of Palestinian kids, right? Like, so it's all blood libel. And so what's happened now is that blood libel has just morphed into Israel's purposely starving the Palestinians. Israel is the most evil entity in the world. And they'll start by talking about Israelis, right? I mean, Israel and the government. We don't like them, but really we don't like Zionists, which like 90% of Jews would identify as in the most like latent, bottom level definition of it.
And Zionist is someone who believes that Israel as a state should exist.
That Israel
or has a right to exist.
Yeah. And so what they've done the last 2 years is actually terrifying, is try and make it so that Zionists are no longer welcome in public space, right? So going after Jewish politicians and targeting them. James Pasternak is the only Jewish city councilor in Toronto, and they went into City Hall and protested him. The arts, we're consistently seeing that. TIFF, the latest with the Toronto International Film Festival, is an example where all of a sudden a movie about a father trying to rescue, or actually heroically rescuing his son and their family on October 7th was deemed, not allowed to be in TIFF. And they made the right decision in the end and showed it. But that was, the perfect example. The Davis Cup in Halifax, they tried to stop Israeli players from playing tennis. The Israeli bikers in the bike race in Montreal recently, they literally physically got into their path, right? So it's about removing us from public life and dehumanizing people in that way. But this time it's Zionist and using blood libel. So I know you have on the list the 71-year-old Jewish woman who was stabbed in the grocery store. I actually know her. We're a small Jewish community. I'm from Ottawa originally. That didn't just happen, right? When the name of the guy was released, I went and found his Facebook page, and it had on it all this blood libel. Israel's starving the Palestinians purposefully. Israel's purposely targeting children. It's just one of the consistent lie and propaganda from Hamas after another. That then this made this guy think that Jews then deserve to die.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that stabbing? How did it happen? Where was she at the time? And what happened to the culprit right now? Where is he right now?
So she was so in Ottawa, there's one Loblaws in the city that has kosher meat in it.
Okay.
So we call it kosher Loblaws. So she was at kosher Loblaws. She wears a Star of David. So identified. So
it was the star that
made her. Yeah. So she's not, I try and I know a lot of people, we try not hide who we are.
Of course. And you shouldn't.
Sometimes I have, because then you're in places where you're like, I don't even want to deal with this. But anyway, so she was shopping with a friend, and the guy came up to her and literally stabbed her, and then left, went outside and sat there and waited for the police. He was arrested on scene. He had his bail hearing, and to be honest, I think he is out on bail.
Don't tell me he's out on bail.
I'm pretty sure he's out on bail. Look, today they released on bail a kid who was who made threats to the Ottawa Jewish community, like very blatant terrorist threats to the community, and he's been charged, and they've let him out on bail today. You're not even a week after a stabbing happened at a synagogue in Manchester, where the guy was out on bail. And so the message that is consistently coming to the Jewish community is your safety actually really doesn't matter. And I know that the bail issue is a major issue that goes beyond just what's happening to the Jewish community.
Right,
It's a huge issue, writ
It's
large.
a Canadian issue. We may need another entire episode to talk about it.
But in this case, we're just constantly seeing cases thrown out or bail given to people that we know have violent intentions against us.
What was the reasoning? I'm sure I would like to dig deep into it after this and try and figure out how is she doing right now?
So I haven't spoken to her. My sister is friends with her daughter. She was obviously shaken and she was stabbed, so she was
Of course.
injured. But I think the whole community kind of at that point felt like, is this really where we're going? So I think the fear that I'm sure she feels is very much felt across the community.
Mm-hmm. I would like to play a video, if you could, This is a video that I'd like you to watch and react. I'm sure you've seen it before.
Yeah, let's just try going on from Wednesday to Friday. You guys are encouraged to attend class. What we're trying to do is get the least amount of people to attend class and cancel classes. We're trying to show support for Palestine. You guys are free to leave. I would encourage us to do so. We're going to be baking notes outside.
I want to go to class. Stop! No, stop pushing. You stop pushing me. I want to go to class. All right, you keep going.
So that is a video of a protest group forcing, not encouraging, not educating, forcing Canadians not to attend their school that they paid to go to. Can you talk to me about, so one of the root cause I feel of the strength in anti-Semitism they're having is that they're entering colleges and universities, young minds, they're spewing hate to young minds.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about this?
First I'm going to say this is like the perfect example of when I say like privileged kids who have no education on it. Because if you're so privileged that you don't go to class, that you're, I'm guessing your parents are fitting the bill and letting you just do whatever. And then you're stopping kids who worked really hard to get into the school, who some of them probably worked to pay off their school, and stopping them from getting the education they deserve. So the fact that this happens, McGill is not the only campus this has happened on in the last 2 years. During the encampments, it was happening at a number of campuses as well. There's been stuff at the University of Calgary, University of Alberta, McGill, U of T, York, Concordia. I can keep going. But the problem is that they legitimately have been taught that Jews, Israel, bad, Palestinians, good, and that includes Hamas, right? And I when you watch all these videos, they all have their faces covered, right?
Right.
Nowhere
do I see their faces.
Never before in history has the good guys, the
covered
people
their
proud
faces,
of what
yeah.
they've been doing, covered their faces.
Yeah.
If they're so proud, if they feel so strongly, then show who you are.
Yeah. In a democratic country, in a free world like Canada, at least that's what we think it is and it should be. How is this happening in universities? Have you maybe done a little bit of, have you ever tried to reach out to universities or colleges, or what is the best of your understanding on what are universities doing to stop this?
So in the US, it's predominantly the, big Qatari money that comes in. It's a bit different in Canada because, a lot of the universities are funded by the provinces. I mean, there still is private money that comes in and a lot of that is Qatari. There's no will to do anything, right? You see it on university campuses, you see it in schools, you see it on our streets with the police. There's no will. They don't want to fight. These people are loud. They might not be the majority, but they're loud. And so they're, in that sense, they have this power over people's minds that they have some kind of control. And so, campuses, university presidents and provosts, they just don't want to rock the boat. And so
is it because they're scared about what would happen to them, or is it because they actually believe in it? What do you think it is?
I think it's a mixture. I think some, maybe they believe in it. I think some are actually legitimately scared, right? They're not beyond showing up at people's houses. They've shown up at politicians' houses. They've shown up at university presidents' houses. They will target you in your home. So do you want to put yourself, your family in that position? And it's hard because, you are responsible for the safety of the campus, and that includes all students. But you also, people are inherently selfish, right? And people inherently worry about themselves.
I used to always say, like, I don't want to get into this because it's not a Canadian issue. But I think we've come to a point where this is a Canadian issue. At least that's what I feel. Because our streets are being murdered. Like, Canadian flag was burnt in Vancouver. Shops were broken. Montreal was burning last year. Yet I do not see any change that is happening. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Hamas is also a political organization that was elected democratically, if I'm not wrong. Is that accurate?
Yes, technically they were elected democratically,
So people voted in
but
Hamas.
there has not been an election in when was the last one? 2007.
So if there were to be an election that would happen tomorrow in Gaza, of course you wouldn't know the answer, but do you think Hamas would be elected again?
I don't know. I think it's really hard because on one hand, they've had control over Gaza, and they've also, that means they've had control over the, UNRWA and all the other aid organizations. Like, they're controlled by Hamas, and so the education that kids are getting in school is radicalizing them and radicalizes them. But I do think that especially now, there have been movements over time. I've worked with one guy named Hamd Housi, who's in Berlin now. He's in Germany. And he's there as an asylum seeker because he had started a movement called We Want to Live. He was part of starting that movement. And they were protesting against Hamas. They literally were just, we want to live. And so he was arrested a number of times by Hamas and put in, and so he eventually fled. And there is protest movements, and there are protests happening, and there are really brave Gazans who are speaking out. I've worked with this organization called the Center for Peace Communications, and their goal is to have the voices of Palestinians, and in Lebanon, the voices of those who are living under Hezbollah, and really just voices of those who can't speak like loudly heard. And what I think is one of the things that makes me the most angry about these protesters here in North America is they don't want to hear what these people have to say.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear what the father calling for Hamas to just leave, get out of here. They don't want to look at the videos of Hamas murdering Palestinians, beating them because they tried to get food that Hamas has stolen. They don't want to see that. They don't want to show that because it's not Jews bad, Israel bad. It's not a Canadian issue. Like what's happening in the Middle East is a Middle Eastern issue. What is a Canadian issue is what values do we have? What do we stand for? If as a country, our values are that of justice, human rights, and compassion and kindness and all those things that we want to say as Canadians that we value, then why are we silent in the face of what's happening to your Jewish neighbors? And you're right. The Canadian flag, you will never see the Canadian flag at any of these protests unless it's being burned. But if you go to, let's say, the Walk with Israel in Toronto, you will see alongside the Israeli flag, Canadian flags. We are proud. I'm proud to be Canadian, right? Mm-hmm. I am a Canadian Jew. Mm-hmm. I'm a Canadian first. Mm-hmm. And I'm proud to be a Canadian. Mm-hmm. Not as much lately. It's harder to be a Canadian and harder to feel that sense of pride when it feels like any day now I want to get on a plane and leave.
Do you get scared when you hear the news that Carney just allowed a lot of Gazan refugees to move to Canada? Does that fear you?
My worst bully in high school is Palestinian. And today he is like one of the most violent and aggressive leaders of the protests in Ottawa because he learned it at home, right? He learned it from his parents. He was taught the Holocaust didn't happen. He, a lot of things he told me that he was taught and that about us was, ingrained in him. And I don't, there are innocent Palestinians, and if they've been able to flee and come here, okay. But my question for the Carney government, and this isn't just the Gazan Palestinians, is what are you doing when people come here to ingrain them into Canadian society? Coming to Canada is a privilege, not
Absolutely.
a right. And Canada has a way of working, and Canada is, our own country. If you want to import your political conflicts from abroad, that's not for here.
Right.
If you want to target people based on hatred for their religion or their ethnicity, that's not here.
Right.
Right? It's not, the thing I hate the most that politicians say is like, this isn't who we are as Canadians. Like, well, it kind of is, because this is who we become, but that's because of them. That is entirely because of them.
Yeah. What Trump said is, if I'm going to recognize Palestine as a state in the US, I'm rewarding Hamas terrorists. Do you believe that Canada, UK, France, and all these countries rewarded Hamas?
Yep. I actually wrote a piece on this I think it was in the Hub last week. And it's 100%. It's turning its back on Israel and our allies and turning its back on Canadian Jews and rewarding Hamas. Hamas themselves has said, like, thank you, right? Like a state without peace, without concessions, without action is just reward. And actually Trump today in a meeting with Emmanuel Macron literally said that in front of him. He said, I would never reward Hamas. And so it'd be interesting tomorrow when Carney sits down with Trump, what he says about it. I think it's shameful. To me, it was a very, black mark on our country for that to happen.
So what do you think we can do? I would like to, close this off with maybe a little bit of constructive thought process. What can we do? We are seeing protests happening. I would love to learn. Like I already said, if someone from the other side would want to come talk to me and help me learn, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to, as long as you don't want to beat me up, you don't want to stop me from listening, and you don't want to, stop me from asking you a question back, because I asked you some questions back and you did not beat me up.
No.
So, I'm willing to listen. So what do you think we can do to come out of this? Because even if tomorrow there is some solution in the Middle East, I don't see how that is going to end anti-Semitism here in Canada.
So I remember December 2023, I was texting with a journalist friend of mine, and he said, things will get better. And I said to him, oh, things are going to get so much worse. And part of that is because the cats really came out of the bag, right? This anti-Semitism that we're seeing now didn't just like happen on October 7th. It's been percolating and underneath the surface for a long time. And now it's, it's out in the public. There's no putting it back in. So what can people do to me, this is not about Israel and the Middle East. To me, this is about, are you as a Canadian comfortable knowing that there are people in your communities, in your cities, in your country who are being targeted based on hate for the simple fact that they're Jews? And if the answer is no, then say that. My friend once said to me, she's like, it's so crazy how many times I get thanked just for, saying that I'm against anti-Semitism. And I'm like, because so many people don't say it. My friend Victoria Mancinelli is like my goddess, because this woman has no fear. And she is out there every day talking about the hostages, talking about, peace, and standing up for the Jewish community. Early on, I said, at this point, I bet you every Jew who's looking at their neighbor is wondering, would they hide you or would they turn you over, right? Like what happened in the Holocaust. And Victoria's like one of those people who I knew would hide me like without a question, and she would find somewhere for everyone she knows to go. She would body block them, like, right? I'm not asking people to be Victoria because she's special, but I'm asking people to take a stand. I work with a group, Allies for a Strong Canada, which is non-Jews who are taking a stand. Michael Westcott is their CEO. Rick Hillier is the is the special patron. And these are people who are willing to take a stand and speak out and make statements. And you get people from all over, from politicians to Jennifer Hedger, who's a TSN journalist, right? People are fed up and tired. And if you are fed up and tired, just use your voice, because our voices are tired.
How many Jews are there in Canada?
Oh, that's not a question I can answer offhand. But we're like 0.3%.
less than a million?
There's probably...
Can you look it up on ChatGPT if you don't mind?
But we're like 0.03% of the population.
And how many Jewish MPs do we have?
4 or 5? 4 or 5.
Yeah. So, yeah, there is close to 500,000 Jews and like 4 to 5 Jewish MPs, 0.9%. So the reason I brought this up is like, you know, I hope that we don't get to a place where in order to stand up for Jewish Canadians that are facing anti-Semitism, you have to be a Jewish MP. I hope we don't get to that place. But if other MPs are not really standing up, Jews will have to work towards getting more representation. That's what I feel. Yep. At least for the Hindus, that's what I feel. Yeah. Because just like how your synagogues are being attacked, our temples are being attacked. Yep. And who are attacking it? Khalistanis. Yep. And who are those? Those are the ones that are responsible for the worst ever terrorist attack that has ever happened to Canadians.
Yep. I agree. I mean, I've been involved in the political process since university. I've worked on the Hill. I've worked in legislatures. The problem, the Conservative Party has and continues to be an ally and speak out and strong, and Pierre is unwavering, and I know that comes naturally to him. I'll give you one final story, and then I know. Yep. So, 10 years ago, I was living in Israel, working in Israel, and Pierre came to Israel on a trip with John Baird. And John Baird was Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time. And I had friends who worked for them. So they invited me to an event so I could see them. And I was sitting next to Pierre, and we started chatting, and we met kind of before. And he has that really good politician mind that very few of them actually have, where he can like remember you. And we were talking, and he remembered that my cousin was his constituent. And at the time, my cousin was serving in the IDF. And he took my cousin's phone number and would like check in on him, text him to check in, and like he wasn't doing it for public, for a public persona.
And this was recent?
That was in like 2013, right? But that's like who he, right? Like that's because he believes it, right? It's not for him. It's not popular to be pro-Israel right now. It's not popular to stand up against anti-Semitism, but they do it. Whereas the vast majority of liberals are cowering or vocally against Israel. Yeah.
Anyway, I know we are out of time, but Ariella, thank you so much for being a voice that you are and spreading. I hope to have contributed just a little bit to this through this podcast, but I'd love to have you again and talk more about this issue and also Canadian politics. But really appreciate you taking your time out.
Thank you for having me.